So hopefully the way that I want to structure this thing is that Tom will do the presentation for the first 30 minutes. There will be a Q&A session as well. So you guys can get to ask Tom some of the works that he will be sharing. And then after that, we'll do another quick 15 minutes of the networking. I think it's super important to build your career, and I would highly recommend that to understand how to do networking and view that as part of your career development. How is that sound? Perfect. How's your Christmas, Tom?
Good. How was yours?
It was good. It was good. I had a vegan retreat, so I'm super detox. I'm super clean in my body now, and I can go back to eat all the junk.
That's good.
Hello, Peter.
I don't think I've done that. I just toxed. Yeah, no, yeah, I've had nice wine and good food, which was nice.
It's funny that they were asking what is my Christmas like. Also, my Christmas like is basically we went to Gympie with my wife and her family, and then we stay at my sister-in-law place. So she is completely self-sustainable, produce her own veggie, own farming, making their own bread, noodles, etc. Super organic, super vegan. That's my Christmas. So that was my
very healthy.
Indeed. We got Chris Davey, my friend. How are you, Chris? Thank you for supporting and coming and join us.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's looking forward to it.
Absolutely. For those who don't know Chris, he works for software company providing the building and also providing all the call center capability for I think mainly, is it in telco, in many other industry as well?
Yeah, mainly sort of government and yeah, utilities and sort of airlines and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so Chris is a software engineer, and he's currently doing a master, and his thesis is about building the modeling for the climate change, climate modeling, that sort of stuff, crazy stuff that is beyond my little brain can process. But Chris is really great in that. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks. Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to it. Should be fun.
Hey, Peter. Sorry, I think you were saying hi. Then we were talking with Tom. Trying to quickly introduce yourself, if that is okay. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today.
So I'm a consultant at Telstra Purple. So I work on all sorts of different data projects.
Wonderful.
My background is databases and moving that all into data integration, and I guess the data engineering world these days with the cloud data services and stuff. So
great stuff. Who did you say that you work for again? Sorry, I didn't.
Telstra Purple. Telstra Purple.
Oh, okay. What do they do? Sorry, no. Excuse my limited knowledge area.
So now, well, over the last about 8 years, Telstra have been acquiring various small consultancies across.
Oh, Telstra. Yeah.
And September 12 months ago, they brought us all together and branded us under Telstra Purple. So we have
yes.
365 consultants, developers, you name it.
Yes.
We cover pretty much all across different spaces.
Indeed. So I think last time I looked up to it, I think within LinkedIn is I think there is about 1,500 people working for Telstra Purple, and it's massive. Can you please do me one favor? Can you tell the guy in charge in the Telstra Purple to acquire my company and also throw in some money to for Tom to do some great work for the regional data at Griffith University.
Hey, happy to sit down and talk to people and work out plans. Actually, they're always on the look for acquisitions. So if there's something that fills a gap, there's actually every possibility. And as far as, because Telstra's got such a huge regional footprint and has such a positive reputation in regional, there's always possibility to be able to put something together and work on regional stuff along the lines of, I guess, what Tom's going to talk about. I don't have any say in any of it, but at the same time, there's opportunity to potentially put a case up. What I can do is invite anyone. Telstra runs an internal unconference 2 or 3 times a year, and they always bring in. There's always external speakers brought in, so certainly it could be an opportunity to make some connections by speaking at unconference.
Wonderful. I think Tom will make a great presentation in this conference, so I'll leave you two to connect. Oh, I just lost Ashley before I got a chance to ask a little bit more about her, but that's okay. But yeah, apart from this, I run the Analytics Show podcast, and that's exactly how I met Tom as well, and also interviewing some of the guys. Been trying to get hold of someone from Telstra to come onto my show, but it has been difficult. Perhaps I will chat with you about that next time. I think we are
happy to have a coffee, whether virtual or otherwise, some stage, and I can give you some lay of the land and work out what.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much for that, and on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for about that Telstra conference show. I think it's about 5:19 now. Before we start, can we just quickly get Ashley, Tam, and Active just to give a quick shout out about yourself, what brought you here, what are you hoping to get out of this, and then we can get Tom to start and share with you guys about some of the stuff that he has been working on at Griffith. Tam, would you like to start first? I think Tam doesn't have the speaker. Ashley, do you want to just to quickly introduce yourself and tell us what brought you here tonight, this evening? A little bit too shy. That is okay. Atif, is that how I pronounce? Would you like to do a quick intro about yourself and what are you hoping to achieve tonight? Okay, cool, no problem, too shy. We'll do that when we have a physical event next time. But yeah, I will. Oh, hi. Yes, good evening.
Yeah, I was a bit from my speaker. Sorry. I'm just a student from Queensland University of Technology. I'm doing my master's in data analytics, and just wanted to attend to get some insights from what's going on in this industry and so on.
Absolutely, you are here at the right time and the right event. And I see Ashley just unmute. Would you like to do a quick intro, Ashley? Nope. 3, 2, 1. Okay, cool, no problem. So that is a big no as well. Something is wrong. That is okay. We'll do a. We'll just do. That is okay, Ashley. Thank you so much for coming again. We'll just do a start with the 30 minutes and just a very quick one for the people who are going to watch this on demand version. So we will send out, perhaps if Tom has got a PDF from his presentation, we will send out this PDF, but only to those people who are SVP, because those people should be rewarded, right? But otherwise, thank you so much, I would say, for coming to this Queensland Advanced Analytics. We're hoping to do some great things with the Advanced Analytics for the Queensland. And tonight we have got Tom Verhelst. So Tom is the director of the Regional Data Lab at Griffith University, where he basically used the data analytics to help the council to plan and to understand the challenges that they have got. I'm gonna pass that to Tom. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's see if I can share the right screen. You seeing a PowerPoint?
Yes, I can.
And working? Okay, good, cool. So I'll start by introducing myself. So my name is Tom Verhelst. I have a little bit of a weird background because I didn't really study IT or data. I have a master and PhD in chemistry. So I, mixed chemicals in the lab and made molecules. And after my PhD, which was finishing in the financial crisis, there wasn't a lot of work for people like me. So I joined a software company called PerkinElmer. Well, they also sell like instruments, but I was part of the software division, and I basically did software implementations and data integration for pharma, the food sector, and petrochemical companies in Europe, India, and the Middle East. And then I joined a pharmaceutical company called UCB Biopharma, where I was in charge of the data from discovering molecules to right about putting them in humans. So anything from images to toxicology data to the description of the molecule or the protein. And then about 3.5 years ago, I came to Australia because I fell in love with a woman that was Australian, and she thought that Belgium, where I'm originally from, was a bit too cold. So I came to Australia, where there's, well, at least in Brisbane, there was no pharma, so I had to sort of reinvent myself a bit. And then I came across a job at Griffith University to set up RIDDLE, which is the Regional Innovation Data Lab. Now, the word regional, because it was mentioned before, is a bit chosen because they were a bit opportunistic. I'll tell you what that means in a bit. But basically, before I tell you what RIDDLE is, I should just quickly pitch Griffith because that's sort of mandatory. So we have 5 campuses across Southeast Queensland. One in South Bank, one in Nathan, one in Mount Gravatt, one in Logan, and one in Gold Coast. We have about 50,000 students. We're quite a young university, but we're quite ambitious. And our specialties are more in the softer sort of sciences, so criminology, psychology, nursing. I think we're now the second or the best school in the world on nursing. Tourism, we're very strong in. We are pretty good in IT, but that's a very competitive field. And so regional is basically because originally the lab was set up in Logan, and by doing it in Logan and by putting it regional, you could get a whole bunch of funding that was designed for regional places. It was also originally, lab was also originally set up to help regional places, so it sort of fits, but we don't just do regional places anymore. Let me just check if someone put something on the chat. If this, everyone can hear my voice.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Then it's just him. Then you have to fix that. Sorry. So the Regional Innovation Data Lab. What do we do? We sit under the engagement portfolio, so we're a bit of a weird entity within the university. So we don't do research. We apply research and we do research translation, but we don't do research ourselves. So we might help researchers with making papers, we might help them with data, but we don't actively go and pursue ideas that we come up with ourselves. The things that we work on are problems from other people. So basically, what do we do? Originally, we were created to help community organizations and regional communities. I'll talk to what that means in a little bit. But that was basically equipping place-based community organizations with data. The idea there is that in the space of community organizations, there's not that much money, nor is there really a lot of data-informed ways of working. So my previous boss, who was quite engaged in that space and was also the previous CIO of Griffith, sort of thought I need to bring data into that sector and get them to look at numbers instead of just what people say and think what is going on. Hence the lab was born. So the lab is sort of, you could call it like, it sits within Griffith, but we're sort of like a social enterprise thing. We do consultancy work, but we don't do consultancy work where it's about money. It has to really be grounded in creation of common value. So besides helping community organizations and regional communities, we try and help transdisciplinary research, because when we sort of started off working, we sort of quickly noticed that the data we collect usually focuses on a place or on a specific problem, and they're very varied. And within Griffith, there's a very strong push to do transdisciplinary research, and they usually have the same data sets in mind and very similar problems, that one person understands that data set, the other person understands that data set, but they don't really know how to put them together or make sense of them. Hence, why we help researchers within Griffith. And then to do that, we basically try and set up data collaboratives, which is what a large part of my job is. And I'll first talk a little bit in the next slides about what I mean with a data collaborative, and I'll show you some examples of that. And then I'll show you some of the examples of the work that we do for community organizations, policymakers, researchers, and regional councils. So basically what we try to do is we try and convince sectors, industries, and government to give us data that they won't give to someone else. We enrich that with open data and with other data that we have access to. And then we make that available to researchers or community organizations in a form that's acceptable. So we've done that with banks. So we have a bank in Australia, not in Queensland. We have a bank in Australia. I can't say the name because we signed some papers that gave us, or is giving us, 150,000 families their financial records on a monthly basis. So we can sort of see income and expenditure. So we know how old people are, where they live, how much their house is worth or is worth, how many mortgages they have, what job they do, if they have money coming in from rent or from other investments. So we can that helps us to do things like enrich ABS data. So if somebody wants to look at a specific place, we sometimes use that data to make it a bit more specific. Or if someone wants to look at things that I'll show later, like, well, how much are people spending less because of COVID, or how much are people spending that are getting job seeker or job seeker? I always mix up the two. Or new start, where are they spending their money on? We can sort of validate that, or we can validate things like people saying, people that get job seekers spend their money on gambling. Well, we could check if that's true or not, because we see gambling expenditures or alcohol expenditures, things like that. So that's the sort of things we do. So we try and set up these data collaboratives with a whole bunch of industries where it's not really obvious that they've done it before. Like, so in my previous job in pharma, this is done very frequently, where you sort of share pre-competitive information like molecules and toxicology data, for example, because it's of value to not have to do the same tests again. So this happens in other industries, but it doesn't happen that often in government or in the social service space where we're sort of focusing on. So one example of data collaborative is the Community Service Data Alliance, which is a alliance that we set up with the Community Service Industry Alliance. So the Community Service Industry Alliance is a peak body that brings together service providers. So anything from, if you're a victim of a bushfire and they're providing services there around, quick housing or food, or migration services, or community services. It could be religious based, or it could be place based, or it could be more difficult things like family and domestic violence placements, or safe houses, or childcare and that sort of stuff. That sort of industry is usually funded by the government and by philanthropy, and there's not really a lot of sharing of data between them, nor is there a lot of sharing around the outcomes of what they do. So we're trying to set up an alliance, or we set up the alliance, and we're basically trying to share data like the case data, the HR data, and then the finance data, to sort of be able to say, okay, look, within this industry, this is the education profile of someone that works in an industry, and within your company or within your specific NGO, this is where you fit. This is normally how an entity like an entity in this industry this is how their finances operate. So that much is coming from the government, that one is philanthropy, and then they can compare themselves. So that's what we're trying to do. And we believe that we sort of have a unique value proposition being a university, being that we don't really have an agenda. I mean, our agenda is creating common value. And by being university, we also have access to certain data sets like the ABS blade system, or the, what is the other one called? One of the people, I think it's a domino system. I forgot. It will come to me later. But we have access to that can enrich it. So even by the government, we've been bestowed with a certain level of trust. And we're trying to use that trust to convince businesses and the social service sector to share data with us. So why do we do that, or why do we want that? So we basically create things like this. So this this is actually the reason why Riddle was founded initially. So initially it was founded to help Logan together, and I prefer to show than to the app than to just talk through the PowerPoint, because it's way more interesting. So Logan Together is an organization that focuses on kids between 0 and 8, I think, in Logan. So normally, I forgot the exact numbers, but I think normally there are 45,000 children in Logan within that age group. 15,000 of them are disadvantaged. And if you would look at the Australian average, that should be 9. So it's basically 6,000 too many. And Logan Together is sort of trying to address that problem by providing all sorts of services, or supporting all sorts of initiatives. Like they have a Facebook group that has something like 30,000 moms in there. They have these initiatives that try and get mothers to do the checkups when they're pregnant, try and make them stop consuming alcohol or cigarettes. So we help them by providing a platform like this. We also help them with data each year for their annual report. But basically, we give them a dashboard that allows them to advocate for things. And it has very basic things from the ABS, like population. But then it has things like the number of babies that were born in 2018, and we'll soon update that with 2019 numbers, because that is sort of relevant for kindergarten, because usually they start, well, you can start at 3 months, but a lot of families wait a year. So it's more relevant from like a year on, especially in that region. So that's the stuff that we add, number of babies, but then we also have, and that's where being in university helps, we have students that go and collect their childcare services within Logan are, and that's something that's constantly updated, because constantly there's new child centers being created. And what is this used for is basically, well, this shows the number of babies born. This shows you, the flags show you where the kindergartens are. So if you would want to advocate for more kindergartens within that region, well, you would probably do it at the bottom of Logan, not at the top, because at the top there's enough of them. That's sort of the logic where they use this for. So they use this to advocate for changes. Another thing that we had added for them is stuff around services or searches for services. So through a collaboration with Info Exchange, we have access to the Ask Easy data. So Info Exchange is a company that sort of creates case data for government, but they also have a platform called Ask Easy, which is basically a Google for good. And Telstra is actually, when you have a phone and you go on www.askeasy.com, there's no roaming charges, because it's sort of considered as a, I don't know, public service or something. But basically, we aggregate their searches, and so we can see if people are searching for, things like family and domestic violence help, or if they're searching for alcohol and drug related help, we can see where that is. And that has been pretty valuable in the last year, because a lot of the traditional ways that the government measures things, like family and domestic violence, is, for example, through schools. So if a teacher sees something, then a report is usually initiated. So you might see a bruise, and then things start happening. Of course, when children are at home, which happened for a while, last year, then of course that doesn't happen. So suddenly there's a drop in numbers, and if you have no real idea of how these things are measured, so farther up the chain, someone says, "Oh, this is pretty good. People are staying at home, and there's less family domestic violence." Well, it's less reported because the system that you have put in place to measure it is broken. And by looking at the searches, you could sort of see, okay, there are actually increases in certain places. The same with alcohol and drug searches. You could see if there were certain lockdowns, if there were searches for alcohol and drug related services, and we could then correlate that, or we could then add the financial data that we have to basically show, well, in that month, alcohol went up. I forgot specific numbers, but alcohol went up a substantial amount in that numbers. Alcohol purchase went up a substantial amount in that. Alcohol purchases in that month went up a certain amount, which then explains why people would search more for alcohol-related services. So that is sort of the thing we do for community organizations. For regional councils, we build things like this. So we built one for Redland, and we've done some for Gold Coast, and we've done one for Brimbank, but this is a specific one that we made for Queensland. And traditionally, if you listen to things like the treasurer, he will talk and say, the economy is 7%, the GDP is down 7%, and mining is up 2%, and industry is down 4%, or whatever it is, which is not really that useful in the era of COVID, where the sort of effects are non-trivial, and they're not obvious. Like traditionally, you would look at things like there's disadvantage coefficients of places that basically show that place is more disadvantaged. So if the economy goes bad, you sort of expect that place will be suffering worse, but that's really not. That doesn't really take into account COVID. It takes into account normality. Like if you would look, for example, at the Whitsundays, it is very affluent, but it's really suffering. If you would, in the last couple of weeks, it's been fine. But if you look at, March, April, May, June, they really had a significant decrease in the number of tourists that could visit them. The same with Cairns. While traditionally, if it goes bad in Queensland, people think, okay, Rockhampton and Townsville might be affected. So that's why we made this. We basically asked the ABS if we could have all the financial records of all the Australian companies, of all the Queensland companies, and then we aggregated that. So basically for each city that has more than 15,000 people, you can look at the sort of industry. So for example, it doesn't really matter which one I click on. For example, construction in Townsville, you could sort of see, okay, how are the 2 last fiscal years doing? And then how is 2019 and 2020 going? Now, 2019 and 2020 is forecasted, and we will get that data officially around April. So then we can see if our forecasts are correct. If anyone is interested how we do that forecast, I can tell you that in detail, but it's quite complicated. But basically, we aggregate all of the individual data, and instead of just saying, Queensland State is doing this, we say, okay, that LGA construction is going well there, or real estate is doing bad, which then helps that local council or Queensland government with specific interventions. We also add things like JobKeeper, and besides just stuff like revenue, we add the number of businesses in those places. So if we look at, for example, Noosa, and we would look at, doesn't really matter, arts, recreation, education, and training, there's 13,000 or 1,300 businesses. There are 418 full FTEs, which means 1,100 employees. So if you then think about the effect that COVID had, you can very quickly see what the effect will be in specific places. Besides that, we've added stuff like the number of DSS payments people get in those specific places. So you could, for example, see the Fraser Coast, there were 9,350 job seeker payments, which again helps you to sort of think, okay, if the job seeker payment is reduced, this kind of means that the community will have this much less money in that period, which then helps local councils and local service providers sort of plan better. Real estate, because everybody likes to see how the property value is doing, so that's added too. And what I forgot to say is all these sort of dashboards are made available to the public. So the PowerPoint will be shared, and there's a few other ones in there, but almost everything that we make is accessible to the public, and the code is usually shared too. So if someone wants to make something similar for a different region, they can very easily do that. This is what I talked about before, where you could see the alcohol and drug services, or family and domestic violence services. And you could see that since sort of we have COVID, that the searches for alcohol and drug have gone up. So that's the sort of stuff that we do for regional councils. Each election, we make a election app where we use similar data, where we sort of hope that people make an informed vote. So we try and make this available again to the public, and we push it through newspapers and the radio, and then we aggregate the same sort of data, but then instead of looking at a place, we look at an electorate, and then you can sort of see, okay, in that electorate, that person is a sitting member, that's how comfortable they are. But then you can also see, you can explore your electorate, you can sort of compare how it looks to other electorates, what the average salary, or not this one, that's the next tab. This one is how the demographics are, how if it's growing, if the population is growing, how quick it's growing, how the labor force looks like, what type of social services people get. But then you could also compare yourself and sort of see, okay, how does my electorate compare to the Queensland and the state average? And all this is sort of used to have informed discussions within Griffith, and hopefully in other places. We get actually a lot of, this is usually our most popular site, because we get like, it's close to 2,000 or 3,000 hours of viewing on this site, which is quite a lot, because most of our other sites are in the hundreds, it's never in the thousands. So that's pretty good. It's pretty good for Griffith too, because it's sort of free advertising. The other work that we do, I'll just go back to the PowerPoint if that works, is we do a lot of policy evaluation. So we evaluate the fuel card, or the full fuel price policy in Queensland, for example, where any petrol station needs to report changes in full fuel price within half hour to the government. And then we've sort of seen that within Southeast Queensland, there's this agreement between, well, I mean, it might not be an official agreement, but there's a system that sort of, there's a wave pattern that happens where the price gets surged every couple of months, and it's always the same fuel stations that are owned by one of the larger companies, basically jumps up the price by a good 30 to 50 cents. And then the rest follows, and the rest of the fuel stations then follow within a week, and the price goes down again. And they sort of only do this with unleaded, they don't do this with fuel to basically make more money, which then this will go into a report to the government who sanctioned this policy review. And I don't know what will happen with it. Someone might get angry or not angry. It probably depends on what's in the media at that specific time, if it would get any attention. The last thing that we do is the research translation. So all of our researchers have great ideas, but then they write a scientific publication, and then that's really good for their KPIs. But if you want to change the world, very few people read scientific literature. So we build apps where they can show their insight. So it can be things like climate change, where we've thought about doing things like you would type in your address and you would see how your insurance premium would rise in the next 20 years based on fire or flood risks. Or if you live very close to the sea, you would sort of show how much your house will be flooded on average, which sort of should incentivize people to change, but it could also incentivize policymakers. This specific example is one of our researchers looks at how healthy food is in specific supermarkets and restaurants. So it's not just, is there healthy food, but it's like, how high is it on the shelf? Is it hidden? Is there any advertisement around healthy options? And then they make a score, and basically, if there's, I mean, they've noticed that if there's more healthy food, there's more healthy people. And how do we know that? Because there's less diabetes type 2, and there's less overweight people. So we then make a map that allows them to show that to the media or decision makers around, you know, if you want to develop a new, I don't know, commercial site in a specific place, maybe you should foresee a place where there's at least one healthy food option, because that potentially decreases obesity and diabetes with X number of people. So that is a sort of research translation that we do. And then we do a lot of prototyping where for some of the algorithms that Griffith builds, we sort of build a wrapper at the front that sort of shows how it's going to be used. So this is one that we did for predicting patients' length of stay based on an algorithm that someone built within Griffith. And I think we participated in the Queensland Health AI data hackathon or something. So yeah, the lab does that a lot because it's the technology that we use really leans itself to rapid prototyping. So we build these things in like a day, which just shows people the idea of how you would use an algorithm. Because I don't know, I think this is a general observation that I have. There's a lot of algorithms being built, but besides the sort of big, large tech like Google, there's not that many use within companies, at least from what I've seen. You know, and at least in healthcare, there's not that much use of it. So we're trying to sort of show how it's going to be used, because most people don't understand how an algorithm works, so they kind of need to see what it will do. And that's what we try to do. So we try to prototype visualizations, how recommendation systems would work and where they would recommend, what they would recommend. And I think that's all I had. Happy to share the slide. Happy to take questions or comments. Anyone who wants to know more, they can always contact me or ask Jason for my details.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tom, for sharing that. I probably will just start with one quick question to open up the room, and highly super encourage the rest of the room to have your question asked to Tom as well. I think my question for you then is, while you are working and building this for the regional business culture, and part of that earlier on, you also mentioned that you work with some of the commercial entities in getting the data to be built into the dashboard in order to make the dashboard to be much more powerful. And I think that is one of the really the highlight of what you have got, right? My question for you and to share to the room is that your approach and how you would have to, what does it take, and how do you convince the commercial entities such as the bank in providing you those information? Because I cannot imagine you having to pay the banks.
No. So one point, when we try and convince companies to give us data, we always try to get them to agree that if we aggregate data, then that we can make it available to the public. And that doesn't always work, especially with the banks, but that does seem to work with the service industry. So where we will try and aggregate like HR or finance data, then we would want to make that available through other platforms. We wouldn't make it available because there's enough platforms around the country that do that. We would just put it on one of those. Now, how do we convince these people? A lot of talking and asking. I mean, there's another bank that I've been talking to for the last year, and yeah, it goes on and off. It's really difficult. That's the first specific bank. We promised them to give them something back, which we did. So we sort of did some research for free, and then they get data. So in a way, we paid, but the research sort of fitted with what we wanted to do. So that was sort of a win-win. Well, I think it's this. You have countries where data is just aggregated by the state and they can see everything. Clearly, we don't want that in a country like Australia for a variety of reasons. We also don't want industry to have all the data for a whole variety of reasons. So I think the only other option is to use a university or something like university. It could be a foundation, but most universities are sort of like foundations. So that's how that works. I just tell people, look, this is the safest place to put it because we're big enough. We have sensitive data. Like we have all the criminal records of all the of every single offense within Queensland. That just data sharing agreements and showing that you know what you're doing, and you know if they ask for certificates, or if they ask what are your security processes, or how do you handle a data breach, that you don't go have to think about that. You can say, okay, this is the guy that does that. This is the process, and then getting them. I mean, if you with industry, getting more than one in a room really helps, because with the banks specifically, I've been trying to do that, but have not had success. With the service industry, it's worked better by just putting them all together. They all want to have that information, but they all don't want to give it to each other. So then give it to someone that's independent, and then you can get the information back. You want the aggregate information back. You don't want your competitors' information. You want to see where you fit in the sector or in the industry. So showing the value again and again and again.
Correct, and that is equally then, I suppose, one of the way in order to convince those people is then you could go into the we saying that you do the aggregate, then you allow them to benchmark. And I think what Tom just said is really the key bit, right? Is everyone wants to know, but then who is this independent body that they all can trust? And the key bit here is the academy, right? So what that basically means for some of the people in the room, whether you are intern, whether you are in uni, whether you are doing your PhD, you probably underestimate the power that you may have got, because as you work for the academy, as you are in uni doing your PhD, or you're doing certain thing, the value you can bring to the table by being associated with the academy would give you the opportunity to be able to make these people to say, okay, I can trust you, as opposed to it is a private company or competitor, things like that. I see that there are a couple of questions coming in. I think the very first question, I'll just read that out. So from Atif, in case of providing the insight for a policy or even for the electoral app, is there a risk of bias that influence the decision of the institution?
There's always a risk of bias. I mean, for policies, we usually don't work alone, so we get a statistician and then make sure that whatever we do is validated, or they do the the statistical component of it and make sure that whatever we present has gone through scientific rigor. When it's elections, there's definitely bias. I mean, even if what we make, someone will talk to it, and someone will talk to what they want to talk to, and most professors have a more left-wing, the majority is more left-wing than right-wing. So of course there's a bias in what I do is when we make things show the data. Like one of the things we do is we try to avoid certain colors. Contrast green and red for political things, for example. Now that map shows red. You try not to add certain colors to make sure that you don't introduce bias that way, but it's something that we constantly look for. Sort of be aware that you have to be intellectually honest.
Okay, I was just gonna say, I think there was a bit of an internet connection problem, and I was wondering, is it just me, or does everyone have the same problem where it was a lot of breaking up?
Okay, sorry. I I can quickly say it again. Maybe if it happens again, I'll turn off my video. That sometimes happens. Yes, there is bias. When we do election apps, we try not to use certain colors, like red and green for certain things, to make sure it doesn't look too, to make sure that you don't over emphasize something, and you try to be intellectually honest. And when it's about policies, we get researchers involved, and we go through scientific rigor, where we make sure that whatever we say, has enough stats behind it that it can be defended. I mean, and that's what you can do. But when someone talks to our apps, there will always be a bias because they'll have an opinion. That's kind of life. I mean, if you want, if you say that you need more childcare, by definition, you've already bought into the idea that childcare is good for children. That is culturally not everywhere accepted, but is accepted with white Australians. So that's definitely a bias. Yeah, you can't avoid that.
Now we have another question from Eva. So her question is, as we may agree, is that the data serve for critical insight and solution. When we talk about the data alliance, so the question is, how do you execute the data governance to ensure your quality and data consistency, so that we could reduce the bias and do the analysis more effectively? To some extent, it seems like it's very similar to the question before. Would that be the way to interpret that question?
Yes and no. Like the data alliance, like the service industry, like if you get data from a bank, it's neat. I mean, there's a few missing fields, but it's consistent, and you don't see weird things. If you get data from service providers, if they're large and they have had a very good IT team, or they've been supported by a good company, then it looks golden. Sometimes it's an Excel sheet and it's just complete shambles. How do you manage that? Well, that's a lot of work, and that's one of the values at being university. We get students that are very cheap or cheap enough to check data and just get it to the point where it's needed to be, and you just get the quality up by looking at row per row, and that's very time intensive in some cases. But by using students, they're cheap, they learn something. And we usually, when we do that, we ask the industry to pay for it, of course. But we then try to tell them, look, you need to move to a more professional system, and these are the systems that your other peers are using, and this is sort of what you get out of that, and you won't have to do that much work every time. But if you keep insisting on using Excels that you then share through emails and people add stuff on, then you're going to keep having these problems. So that's a long maturity process, and that's just depending on the company. There's just different levels of their maturity.
That's great. Anyone else have any question for Tom? Go for it, Chris.
I've got a question. Hi, Tom.
Hello.
So in the process of collecting and aggregating this data, are you guys building the sort of capability to store it over the longer term and then leverage it for multiple projects?
Yeah. That is really where we sort of see. So sometimes we'll buy data. So we've bought app data that was very expensive where people were, and we'll sort of ask one customer to pay for it and then do the work at a loss to be able to use it somewhere else. Yes, that's exactly how we operate. So depending on the data we get, we will do it for free, or we will charge a certain amount if we see a lot of value in data. And then we sort of build an asset that's used internally, but also externally. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. And are there any agreements that might limit the time use availability of that data that you have, like say with banks, they might have certain...
I refuse to sign that.
Yeah.
I'm okay signing things like asking them before I can do something with it, or I'm okay to say, this is the scope, but I am not signing things that say you can't. Well, I mean, unless they would ask me 20 years, and I would agree with it. But I would say you can't use it more than 2 years. I would just, there's no value then.
That makes sense.
Why would I mean, if you want someone to look at it for a year, just go to a professional data science company and get, pay the premium and do that. Don't ask me.
Yeah.
That would be my answer then.
And between your organization and the organizations that supply you data, you providing sort of some form of integration point that helps them keep that data fresh, like it's sort of, if they're not supplying a once off, if they're continuously providing a feed?
Sometimes we use APIs, but it really depends on, the challenge there is that frequently they change how they measure things.
Yeah.
Or like, until last year was New Start, then it's job seeker. So I could get an API from the government.
Yeah.
And the same with the fuel price thing. They have an API and I've used it, but then they'll change something in the date, or then they'll change the name of a field. And then there's more work just keeping that API working properly than just downloading the CSV. So it really depends on the volume. If it's high volume and if they're reliable. So we have one which is very reliable, and yeah, there I use it. But there's a lot of other ones, especially the government, who seem to constantly change how they do things, where it just, that's not worth the effort.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Question for you when you were talking about, in terms of signing the agreement, etc., because they want to limit the use. It sort of like prompted me to think that perhaps some of the organization come to you, IDL, and also Griffith University is because they have this idea that they want to make use of these resources because number one, it's going to be cheaper, and that's probably one of the reasons that they come to you, right? Is that something that happen often? Do you think one of the key reasons that they come as well, or is it more of the wrong expectation and have to manage that expectation?
It's more and more, but it's usually not because they think we're cheap. It's usually because they think we can bring something that someone else doesn't. And if you give your data to a commercial entity, then you always risk that you can, if you want to convince an industry to share something, in most other examples that I know of, it's a foundation that does that. Something that's of independence and of scale, where you, so sometimes it's us starting it. In the case of the Community Service Data Alliance, it was the community service industry that asked us, can you please help us with this? And we're like, yeah, that sounds really cool. Let's do it. With the bank, it's something I've been trying. I've been trying with the bank because I wanted more information on COVID. I wanted to be able to say, in Cairns, there's a decrease in buying power of X, or people are not buying this now, people are buying that now on like very real time, but yeah, they weren't that keen.
I know it actually already happened. One of the consulting company in Australia, they actually managed to convince the Big Four bank to very much give them all the transactional data. And what they do then is they actually aggregate all the data, and then subsequently they sell the aggregate data back to different company, where the different company will subsequently use this aggregate data in order to do certain thing and use that data as a reference point to do whatever things or whatever analytics, build the model that they need. So that's the first thinking. If you were talking about the banking's data, I suppose the second thing that worth considering is open banking. So open banking basically means that the consumer now owns the banking data that about their account, about their transaction, all the sort of thing. The whole idea and the concept of that is bank no longer owns our data, but it is the consumer. We own the data. Now, what does that mean? What's the implication of that? And from the perspective is that, say, for example, if I am moving from bank A to bank B, in the past, when I move to bank B, everything starts fresh. Okay, when I start applying for the bank account, it starts fresh. When all the credit history, obviously, it still go to that credit bureau in terms of the credit history. So that obviously would still continue, but a lot of the information that I have got with the bank A would very much retained in the bank A, right? But when I go to the bank B, the open banking will not allow us to be able to move all of this information from bank A to bank B using the open API. I believe they have the deadline for, I think, sometime mid of this year, but I think it has been pushed. But what I'm trying to say then is perhaps open banking is something that you want to look at. So that's one. The second thing, I also know that there's a software company in Europe. I need to find exactly the company name, but they actually have an open banking API. But obviously, this is going to be just applied to the European, which is a lot more open, which is a lot more advanced or more mature than us in this particular area of the open banking. But they actually have the open banking API, so literally you could get the data. Is my interpretation. So that is perhaps something that you may want to look at instead of having to speak to the bank in getting for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that I wanted to do it is because I knew that you would have commercial agents that would do it, and I think that's great. And you know, places like Brisbane Local Council, which has like I don't know, it's like more than $1 billion in you know, operating budget. They can spend a few million on data, but if you ask Gladstone, they have a few, you know, maybe 20K for something like this, and they won't get in the door. So that's why I was trying to do it, not really for the sort of bigger cities, but the smaller places. Because I knew that the bigger places would get it somehow, because you would have some, I'm sure large consultancy firms have done it too. Yeah, I sort of hope that that sort of information, open banking, it's the same in my opinion with like your phone and, you know, the aggregation of apps. That's all our data that's then being monetized. I don't mind that it's being monetized if there's money, but there's places that it can be used to just create, you know, value for people where there's not a lot of money. For me, there should be sort of a balance where you try and provide it for free there, or you provide it for free in a limited case, and then if they want to pay for more, then you provide that. That's what I was thinking, but yeah, that didn't happen. Which is fine. I mean, you know, you keep trying. If it wouldn't have been COVID, I also wouldn't have tried. It was basically because I was thinking this is going to be, and I think next year. I mean, Australia has been very successful in managing it, but the effects on the economy are really not obvious yet. And there's been a lot of money pumped into the system, and losses are being brought backwards or forward based on tax. But we'll have to see. I mean, different places what happens, because it's if you have a place like Cairns where a large part of your industry is basically tourism, I mean, international tourism. If nobody comes to Australia in 2021, this could be a problem. And it's places like that where I think we should just be sharing that information, not forever, but just currently, because it would really help to make proper decisions.
So apart from banking, what other information or the data that you think would be helpful that you would need in order to go into this IDL to help all of these households?
Well, the service sector would definitely also be good there, just to be able to see how long people are queuing for specific services, how long the waiting times are. So that's stuff that we're working through now. I mean, for other initiatives we've looked at, or we have one of the big energy providers has given us, I think, all of their client data. That just shows you things like the usage of electricity and gas in certain places. So again, if you would like that specific one, if you would want to put money on reducing gas or carbon footprint by reducing electricity, it would be interesting to sort of know where the biggest, not individually, but as groups, where should you target your efforts, or where are your efforts not working, and then you can do something else. That's sort of the thing that we have tried to do with energy providers. There's so many industries where I think just sharing data would be of value. I mean, the apps would definitely, there's apps aggregators that we buy data from the US, who basically aggregate apps of data in Australia, and then they sell it back to Australians. And it's not cheap. It's cheaper. I mean, it's like I think a quarter of the price that a commercial agent would pay. So at least they make some effort. So all that information is very valuable for all sorts of reasons. But for specifically COVID, or at least for specifically the economic impact of COVID, it is the transaction stuff and the savings. So like you have, I mean, people like me who have a very stable job, we've saved money because I'm paid the same and I'm at home and I can't spend my money anywhere because I can't go anywhere. So I've saved money, and then you have the treasurer saying, "Oh, people are saving," but that's not true for everyone. And differentiating that would kind of be nice, because saying everyone's saving money if you are not saving money, that's not a very pleasant thing to hear when you're struggling or when you've lost your job. So I think those things are important and would help with the messaging. That's the sort of stuff that we've been thinking about doing with the bank data or with financial transaction data.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, I want to thank you so much for sharing all of these things. I was just gonna ask, is anyone interested in going to the breakout room to do the networking? I probably will just break it into the 3 different rooms, and then we'll just assign people automatically to 3 different rooms, and we'll do a quick 15 minutes of networking. I think it probably is helpful to kick off the year with your networking journey. How is that sound? Is anyone interested, or yes or no? Or perhaps we just do it here, given that the size of the room is only just 12 people. Yes, no? Yes, I hear a few yes. Cool. See a few more tick. Well, I'm just gonna do that then. And before I do that, and before I let everyone go, again, thank you so much, Tom, for coming to the Queensland Advanced Analytic to share all of these. Has always been wonderful to hear you talking. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. It's excellent. Thank you.
Let me do my breakout room. This is the first time I'm doing this, so bear with me. Okay, great. See you guys in the room. Oh, okay. Amazing. Which room am I in? Oh, okay. Here, Chris, David. Oh, no. Not Tiff.
To see what the data innovations labs and other parts of the Brisbane data community and what they're doing. I was really interested in that. So yeah, that's why I decided to join in. And
Cool.
yeah, it seems like you guys do a lot of things and a lot of really good insights.
We try. Thank you.
So about the websites that you had shared with us, the Queensland one and the other for other institutions, the maps you guys built. So do you have to use any GIS with that?
We use our it's called again leaflet, I think it is. It's all in R, so it's shiny apps. So we built all stuff in R. We could build it in ArcGIS. So it's ArcGIS sort of based, but it's not ArcGIS. It's not the application ArcGIS. It's called Leaflet, I think, the specific.
Yeah,
I don't build the apps.
There's a framework in the list, right? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because if I code, I do Python. I don't do R. But the only coding I do is like linking data and doing analysis and running algorithms. I don't. If I want to visualize something, I ask one of my team who's much better at it than me. So they make the apps in R. We just use R Shiny because it's cheap it's software as a service. You pay like $2,000 a year, and you can put as many websites up as you want, and very easy to spin up and down. No overhead.
Oh, all right. That sounds good.
Jason, what happened? Sorry.
So No. So, is there any, like, for a student like me, is there any opportunity to get to learn more about this stuff by working with you guys, like an apprenticeship or voluntary work? Is there any volunteering opportunity?
Yeah, we have work integrated learning opportunities. I've never done it with another university, but just shoot me an email and then I'll ask around how that's done.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah,
I
that
can
is
ask
great.
around. Yeah.
Okay, so the slides that you have shown, would that be shared with us?
Jason, are you sharing the slides?
Yes, absolutely. So I
Okay.
will share the slide. I'll grab the slide from you, Tom.
Yeah, I have to send that to you.
Thank you. I will share the slide to all of those people who RSVP only instead of everyone else. So I think after you RSVP yes in the event, you definitely will get that.
All right, that sounds great. And I get Tom's contact information on the slides, right?
So I think I will share the profile of Tom. So what I would suggest is you connect with Tom on LinkedIn, and then you can take it from there. How is that sound?
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, I think
Right.
instead of putting the private phone number.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking of the email. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, just let me continue and finish. I was just gonna type a message to everyone in the room, and so that they expect. Give me 2 seconds. Sorry. Yeah, on the dot. So I was just typing the message to everyone, say the networking will continue and finish at 6:30 p.m. on the dot, so that we are not holding up everyone. So we still have 2 minutes to go. But yeah, I will definitely share the LinkedIn profile of Tom. I think he's already in there as well. So feel free to check it out while we are here, or otherwise I would definitely send that again. Yeah, feel free. Yeah, use LinkedIn to build a data analytic network. Highly recommend that. I actually just spoke to recently interviewed the head of analytics of Australia Computer Society, Steve Norrie. Steve is a big advocate of building your personal brand and also network on LinkedIn. Especially if you're a student, I can assure you that this is one thing that you absolutely want to master in your career as one of the soft skills. Yeah. Did you say you study at QUT? Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm currently studying at QUT.
Right, I see. What year are you in? Final, first year, third year, bachelor, master?
I'm doing a master's in data analytics, and I finished 3 semesters. I have 1 semester left.
Right, I see. Okay, good stuff.
Very good.
You have any other question for Tom, or maybe for myself, Atif?
No, not right now. It was a great presentation. I got to learn a lot, and I look forward to contacting you again, preferably in LinkedIn.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you.
What is the plan, Tom, for the 2021, apart from getting those data?
It will be interesting to see what happens next couple of months. Yeah. It's been, I mean, we've had a few things that we were like, okay, this we're doing no matter what happens, but then all the other stuffs, like every other month there was something else that happened and sort of things got in the way. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens at the uni. We've just gone through a restructure, so that took a lot of effort end of the year. Yeah, I mean, we won't change that much about what we're doing because a lot of the stuff takes a lot of time, as you know, setting up these data sharing agreements. It takes a lot of time. But we have we've got a big philanthropy grant to look at Melbourne and Southeast Queensland. So that's good. We'll do some work on that. The community service industry alliance or the community service data alliance will take a lot of work, because we basically will start sharing data, and then yeah, I've already seen some, and some of it is really bad quality, some of it is good quality. So it's going to take time finding budgets for that, applying for grants, and convincing that sector to put some money up. We first have to sort of show something, and then say, give us something, we'll do something for free, and then this is what we can do with this little thing that you gave. Now give us some more and pay for it. That's happening.
Right.
It's fun.
I'm
What
sure.
about you?
Me, I BAU, so work is continuing, but I am seeing lots more opportunity, but also more opportunity that seem, I think because of the pandemic, right, that everyone is working remotely. So I feel like the signal or the messaging that I am exchanging with some of the contact and also the potential client or prospect is that I feel like I am getting a little bit more opportunity from overseas as well, which is something that I don't quite expect prior to this, because like as a consulting company, and I'm not like a huge Deloitte, that sort of consulting company, but as a small consulting company, I feel like I'm still getting some of those opportunity is amazing, is beyond amazing. So I'm quite glad for that.
That's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. So that is one thing. But the second thing that I'm pushing much more is also rather than trying to continue to do the consulting or project delivery, which is again time and material, and which is basically billing people for my time and my team's time, right? I am further and moving ourselves away from providing the analytic as a service or software as a service. So whether it's we build people's software, the end-to-end platform, or perhaps we just pump things together. And what they basically mean is like, in order to use, but this is only for the assistant client as well. So what they basically mean is like, rather than they try to build the model, build everything, what will happen now is that they just provide the input data into the analytic as a service, this engine, and then we pump out the data back to them, and they can completely ignore whatever goes in between. So that is, I think, I suppose, what get me excited as well, because it means that we will then be moving away from the time and material orders.
Probably cheaper.
Exactly, cheaper as well. That is correct.
Less complexity.
That's correct. Because I've done a lot of those work in the past life already, and one of the area actually got me thinking is which is the financial services company, right? Because that is my key sector that I focus in, which is about that open banking. Like for example, what I was sharing with you earlier is that how this one of the company. So that company is Quantium. Have you heard of Quantium before? Yeah, Quantium. So Quantium was the one that I was referring to in that earlier conversation. So they are 50% owned by Woolies, Woolworth Group, and then they are really large. I think there's about 500 to 1,000 people. But what I described earlier, which is that same thing, is like they aggregate all the data from the big four bank, which control about 80% of the market already, and then just sell those data back, right? So that is sort of like a classic example, analytic as a service or software as a service. Yeah, so super. That is, I think, is what got me excited. It also means that I get to build more software rather than just going to meetings, talk about project.
Yes, that's true. It gets a bit boring sometimes, doesn't it?
Exactly. So who are the people coming to you this day? I was going to ask you some of those companies that come to approach you to use the services. If you are not interested working with them, what happened?
Well, usually when someone comes to us, they've already have explored commercial. So, and then someone has referred them, because we don't actively go search for them that much. Lately, it's been more in the cultural sector. So a lot of the stadiums and things like the new museum in Gold Coast. What is it called again? The Hota. That's where they're sort of interested in seeing what we can do. And then, yeah, I mean, there's stuff in healthcare happening, but that's small. It's really in its inception phase. It's not companies, it's sort of startups and research ideas. A lot of questions from government around policy that we have more and more. Like we did this thing, we did this COVID review for them, like looking at all their interventions and seeing the effects of them. That's the sort of stuff we get asked for quite frequently now. The stuff around childcare and child safety. So more and more, the really sensitive components within the government that sort of see like we can't really bring this to a commercial agent. We need something else because the data is too sensitive, or we need a researcher to look at it because we can't make sense of it. Yeah, but that if